All right, it is 10:15. So good morning and thank you for joining us. While people are still kind of trickling in, if you guys wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves briefly, like name, position, district. I just want to get a sense of who's in the room, and then Phil and I will introduce ourselves. So anybody can go first.
Javier Uribe, Edgewood ISD, STEM Coordinator, Office of Innovation and Transformation.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, I'm Teresa Salinas, and I'm the Chief of Schools, Edgewood ISD.
Hi, Teresa.
Maya Lagano. So big echo. Bell Creek, EA to Lubbock and Garland.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, Dana.
Hi, Kristen.
Kristen Willman from Edgewood, Innovation Monitoring Specialist.
Awesome.
Rodney Watson, Spring ISD Superintendent.
Thank you. If you just joined, I was asking folks just to kind of popcorn out who you are, where you're from, just so I could get a sense of who's in the room.
I'm Marshall Baker. I'm with Maya Consulting, and I help with school actions.
Thank you.
Tracy Davis with Grand Prairie ISD.
Okay, welcome.
Darrington Ramsey with Ector County ISD.
Okay, thank you. Adam, does everybody know you?
Hey everybody, I'm Adam. I'm with Civic Solutions Group, and I've had the pleasure of serving as executive advisor to San Antonio and being really involved in this work with Dana.
Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started because I know we have a limited amount of time. So I'm Dana Ray, Chief of Human Capital Management for San Antonio ISD. Over the last 4 years, I've also been working directly with the Office of Innovation and leading a lot of this work. And so I'll explain more of what that looks like as we get into the presentation. But first, I want to give my co-host, Phil Lasser, an opportunity to introduce himself as well.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Lasser. I am the Director of Research Operations here in San Antonio ISD's Office of Continuous Improvement. Also working with the Office of Innovation with all this work today, as well as a lot of our teacher incentive allotment work, getting our Master Teacher Initiative program up on board. So good morning, good to meet you all.
All right, so with that, we're going to jump right in. What I would ask is throughout the presentation, if you have questions, if you could go ahead and put those in the chat. Phil's going to help me in moderating that. And if it's a question directly related to what we're talking about, he'll interject so that we can try to get to that on the spot. Otherwise, when we get to the end of the presentation, we should have plenty of time for questions. But today we're going to be talking about what we refer to as our theory of action, which is all centered around operationalizing AE local, which is our policy for educational philosophy for the district. And for us, that is managed instruction with performance empowerment. And I will say that's a bit of a tongue twister if you try to say that too many times too quickly. So if I mess that up today, just know that, and you can try that out for yourselves to see what that's like. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is what is managed instruction with performance empowerment, why pursue it, how is it being implemented, at least in SAISD, and currently what do our next steps look like. So this is I'm concluding my 21st year in the district. And so this slide is super important to me because I've seen this continuum over the years, depending on what leadership look like. And so if we start on the left side of the continuum, the best way that we can describe managed instruction would be where the district essentially tells schools what to do, how to do it, when to do it, how to say it, all of those kinds of things. And so as you can see here, it's tightly controlled curriculum, pedagogy, and operations, same content at the same time in the same way for everyone. What that means is less educator autonomy and less space for bottom-up innovation. However, if you swing all the way to the right of the continuum, then you see what loosely controlled could look like, and that's performance empowerment. That could essentially be where we tell schools, you're totally responsible for all the decision-making, you figure it out, you're in charge. So that's heavy decentralization. They make all the decisions related to curriculum, pedagogy, and operations. However, in exchange, there would be accountability for the schools because they'd still be held to the same accountability standards through the state as well as the district. And then if struggling, they're kind of on their own in terms of what support looks like if it were loosely controlled. So the idea behind managed instruction with performance empowerment is to strike a balance between the two. And so essentially what that means is we create centrally managed standards for academic programs and operations that allows and ensures for flexibility, particularly as it relates to performance. It introduces the notion of earned autonomy, and we'll talk more about what that looks like a little.
Hi, everyone. I think we might have lost Dana for just a moment. So let me go ahead and work to get her back, okay? We'll be back in just a moment.
Okay, for the record, we did meet ahead of time with Michael and we worked through what we thought were all of the technical difficulties that we might encounter today. So let me get everything going again. Okay, I think this is where I left off. All right, thanks for everybody's patience. So essentially what I was saying was, so in our board policy AE local, which is our managed instruction with performance empowerment, there are 5 key components. The first of which is managed foundation. And so what that means is the district will establish what our non-negotiables are in terms of instruction, budgeting, and talent management. There has to be some level of baseline in order to then figure out later where autonomy might live. And then the second piece is performance management. So there has to be a mechanism by which you measure performance if you're going to grant autonomy based on performance. And so for us, that's our school performance framework, which we'll talk more about in just a bit. Third is the notion of flexibility and empowerment. So schools do have to have the opportunity to earn autonomy based on that, for us, school performance framework or whatever tool you use for performance management. And then that can also lead to the opportunity for student-based budgeting. And then what we'll talk more about in a bit is central office infrastructure. So there has to be an opportunity for the central office to ensure that it's organized in such a way that it can provide schools differentiated supports in predictable ways. So why would a district consider pursuing this type of theory of action? So again, if you've been in education for more than a minute, or maybe even just a minute, you've probably noticed that we are not always the best at providing predictable services and making decisions in a predictable way. And so this theory of action allows the district to create a systematic, consistent way of decision-making related to school-based autonomy. It also, as a result of that, gives the district the opportunity to operate in a more coherent and efficient way. And then if you think about what a world could look like if you're able to implement this, could be a huge talent recruitment and retention strategy, because who wouldn't want to work in a system where they knew what the rules were ahead of time, where there was an opportunity to earn additional autonomy through performance? That's the thinking behind that. And then other districts across the nation have used this successfully. And then lastly, it creates conditions for success by empowering those closest to students, the school as the unit of change, while still putting guardrails in place. So kind of back to striking the balance on that continuum that I shared in the first slide between the loose control and the tight control. The graph that you see on the right was information that we collected as we started engaging our community around our school performance framework, particularly around the notion of autonomy. And so what you see here is across some key areas, blue represents school and district leadership, although it was largely school leaders, and then green represents teachers. And so as you look at that, you can see that it's obvious that they want to be able to have greater decision-making power and autonomy, and in the areas that you would probably expect, especially when you kind of see where teachers fall in relationship to principals around budgeting, because right now that's not something they have much to do with. But if you look at areas like professional development, I mean, they're right up there. Those are the highest. They want to be able to determine what kind of professional development they need to participate in based on the needs of themselves and their communities. So in terms of central office organization or reorganization, one of the things that requires a little bit of stretch thinking is central office has to start to be able to recognize different schools require different types of support. So as an example, in SGISD, we have traditional neighborhood schools, we have in-district charter schools, and then we also have 1882 based charters with partners. And so in all of those different types of schools, central office has to be able to recognize how best to support as well as respond to schools' needs. And again, like I've been saying, in a predictable way. And ideally, everything should be geared towards increasing student achievement. So one of the ways that we've attempted to kind of focus this work is we created an Office of Continuous Improvement. So like Phil mentioned at the start of the presentation, he's a member of that office. And so what that office does is, and they were new last year, but that's the office where all of this theory of action work lives. Additionally, they have our Master Teacher Initiative, which is what that's what we call our TIA project. And so one of the things that the office does is not only do they design our MTI system, but they also include our appraisal and educator quality team. And so that's the group that's working with administrators across the district to improve calibration on T-tests, to improve the type of feedback that teachers receive, so that as part of that Master Teacher Initiative, we can make greater gains and make better use of that initiative as a whole. And then additionally, this is also the office where our school performance framework lives, in addition to our socioeconomic block work. And then of course, there's always all the special projects, because they're such an amazing group of folks that they are able to kind of be deployed across the district in different departments to be able to help on individual projects wherever needed. So you guys have heard me talk a little bit about the work that is required with departments in order to start to operationalize a theory of action like we've described. And so what you see here is a graphic that we put together. We started this work with departments last summer during the pandemic. So everything's been virtual up to this point. And we started with our academics team, which is one of our largest teams. Adam's been right there with us as a thought partner throughout this. And he can say, he can attest to the fact that we have learned a lot. And so I can tell you one of the places that we thought we should start that in hindsight didn't work out to our advantage was we thought we would start with autonomy, and quickly realized that we had a lot more work to do leading up to that point. So if you follow the graphic below, we came to a realization that we needed to start working with individual departments at a level of codifying their vision, mission, and overarching goals, which should then lead them to be able to identify key services. And then once establishing key services, then kind of look at, so what are the services we provide and why do we provide them? Is it because it's mandated by the state? Is it a district mandate? You know, what are the kind of rules of the game that require us to provide the services that we do? And then where might we expand that? That kind of goes back to establishing the managed foundation that I mentioned as the first key element in this model. And so it's hard to talk about autonomy if your district staff don't know what their non-negotiables are and don't know what policies, procedures, practices drive what it is that they're saying are the non-negotiables. And so at the point at which a team can establish the non-negotiables, then you can get into the conversation about, okay, so now that we know what's required, where are opportunities for autonomy? And then how should people be able to earn it? And so then that goes back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of performance management and the tools that you use to be able to measure performance. And for us, that's our school performance framework. And then lastly, once a department has an idea of, what all of these things are about, then it's reflecting back and taking a look at the organizational structure and identifying, is it the right structure? Is it the right people? Now, who's responsible for all of these things? So that then there's accountability at a department level and a district level for then the key services and the autonomy that comes with that. We'll probably have an opportunity through questions to talk about this more later, but I will say this is probably my favorite part of the work. And it's just because for me, having been in the profession for as long as I have and in the same district, we work so hard at reinventing the wheel sometimes, particularly as personnel changes. And so for me, this is an opportunity for the district to really codify district-wide what we do, why we do it, and how we do it, so that then when there are changes in personnel or leadership, this is something we can fall back on to keep the work going instead of having to continually, in a lot of cases, start over, which is what I've seen over time. And this is also what we expect of our schools to be able to do. So as a district, we should model this. I can also tell you it takes a really long time to do this work. When we started last year, we were very ambitious in our initial timeline based on our work with one department and made a lot of assumptions about the kind of support that we would need to provide departments to be able to even make it through this path, as in the graphic below. And so we have continually reset that timeline to be able to go slower so that we can get it right. And then I think we're now engaging 3 different departments within the academics team. We're confident we will get to a point where we'll be able to hit a stride and be able to kind of expand that scope, but it will take a lot longer than you probably anticipate, just from a practical point of view. So I've mentioned several times our school performance framework, and I know just kind of based on where you guys said you were from at the start of the session, everybody's at a different place in terms of whether or not you have one, where you might be in implementation. I know for us, this has been a work in progress over the last 2.5 years. And so essentially a school performance framework is a performance management tool. So how can you provide autonomy to campuses if you have no way of measuring where they are? That's what this is for. The other thing that it's helped us do as a district is really engage with our community to identify what quality schools look like in SEISD. And so I say that because and again, if you've been in education for a while, teachers are always like, it's more than test scores. Principals will say the same thing. Parents will say the same thing. And so this provides the district with a more nuanced way of identifying the quality of a school beyond state accountability. So our school performance framework doesn't just look at academics, it looks at school culture and climate, and it also includes social emotional learning. But essentially, it gives the district a way to be able to deploy resources and services in a more predictable way. And what I can say is a lot of times what happens in the past, again, and it's been what it's been, a lot of times resources were deployed for different kinds of reasons, sometimes relational, sometimes it was, I know a lot of school leaders felt like the only schools who got resources were those who were improvement required or didn't meet standard. And it wasn't always the right resources. It was just kind of, let's give them as much as we can, and that's going to help them, make the gains that they need. And so the idea behind the school performance framework is that you can use the data collected to be able to provide really targeted supports for schools based on where they are. It also provides families with clear and consistent information about school quality. So in the fall is when we'll release our first pilot year of school performance reports for each of our campuses, and those will be publicly available to all of our community. So just kind of to recap, core goals of an SPF: drive school improvement efforts, reinforce and scale best practices, and accelerate student achievement. So in SGSD, we also have an additional measure that we include in our school performance framework. And that's, I think what we've called it is the poverty index. And so we use a socioeconomic block system here to be able to look at the median income, the home ownership, single parent households, adult education, using census blocks for all of our neighborhoods. And so if you look at the map on the right, so the lowest levels of poverty are going to be block 1, the really dark green, and then the continuum down all the way to block 4. So anything that you see in red, that's where we're going to find the densest poverty in SEISD. And so the map here that you see is of the district. And so it should give you some sense of kind of what that looks like across the district. But then I would also point to, if I can move my menu for a sec. On the bottom right, you see the federal income criteria for a family of 4. And so just kind of like in relationship, you know, poverty level 26,500. If you were to look at it from a free and reduced lunch program, you see even higher figures. And so when you look at our median household income by block, like for us, block 4 is $22,280, which is significantly less than the poverty level of 26.5 for the federal income criteria for a family of 4. So this really is a game changer in terms of being better at providing the resources that a school needs based on the students that they serve. And so, like I said, there is a component in our school performance framework to account for the poverty index. And then essentially a school performance framework has different levels. And so ours has 5. And so the idea would be, if you see the 2 continuums to the right, level 1 would represent the highest performing schools on the school performance framework. And then all the way down the continuum to 5, which would be the lower performing schools. And then in conjunction with that, the idea would be that the higher performing school should have the opportunity to have more autonomy, whereas the lower performing school probably needs more resources. And so the SPF, like I've said before, helps us figure out what those resources should be. I'd also point out, it doesn't mean that the higher performing school doesn't get resources. It's just along the continuum, this is what you would need to think about in terms of, and this is something we're struggling with, once we build out how autonomy, what you get based on the autonomy that you have at different levels, it kind of begs the question, you know, at what point by level should a school just have to do the non-negotiables, the managed instruction, and then where can other autonomies live and what does that look like? Okay, so in terms of next steps for us, like I said, we started what we call our theory of action work last summer. We started with academics. And to give you some sense, we started with our curriculum instruction team. Then after we worked with them for about a month, we added another department, and that was our bilingual department, mostly because the work is so similar between those two and one could kind of build off the other. And then we have added a third team since then in terms of our 21st century learning and extended day programs. But we've also taken a little bit of a step back. And within our curriculum instruction department, we're now starting to go a little bit deeper. And so that department has already made it through, let me flip back real quick. That department has already made it through the first 4 steps: codifying vision, mission, and goals, identifying key services, identifying the rationale for the services. They're kind of on the cusp of starting the autonomy conversation. Kind of a natural tension that happens when we tried to talk non-negotiables was it's hard not to talk about autonomy at the same time. But if you can isolate that, it's helpful. What we are doing now is going one step deeper and starting with the math department within the curriculum instruction department to talk about whether or not the services the math department provides are any different than what curriculum instruction provides as a whole, or if additional nuance is needed there. Go back. So eventually we hope to be able to get to all of the departments within our academics division, as well as engage human resources and finance to develop and implement a systematic and consistent approach to providing schools with direction and autonomy. And then the culminating product will be the creation of a theory of action guidebook. And that's where it's probably super nerdy of me, but I get really excited. Our opportunity to codify an implementation plan of how the district delivers quality education services to all students. And I like to think of that as what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And once that's captured there, the idea would be that it would be more sustainable than what's kind of been happening in practice as leadership and personnel changes over time. So with that, I will open it up for questions. Phil, you're on.
We got a couple questions in the chat. The first one, I don't know if you want to talk about what does the training, coaching, capacity building look like with the work with departments going through building all of our theory of action?
That's a great question. And we've learned a lot about that. Adam can certainly speak to that as well. So I think one thing that we had to learn, or we made a lot of assumptions early on that we now have a better understanding for. So assumptions we made early on were, because we had new leadership in certain departments, we thought there were some things that they may have already done, like codify their vision, mission, and goals. And so what we found was that wasn't the case. In many instances, we did have to start from scratch, so to speak, with them. And they found that to be an opportunity. And so kind of the way that we've had to shift or pivot is to recognize us as Office of Innovation or Office of Continuous Improvement staff as a consultant going into another department and trying to provide them with frameworks and activities and ways to be able to think about this so that we can get to the outcome that we're looking for. So, I mean, we've acknowledged it's okay to go back to the drawing board. We might start with one template, start working it through with the department, and then immediately have to go back and kind of make modifications or completely adjust the template, or just based on conversations internally. We've had a lot of conversation about, okay, what's a better way to say that? How else can we think about that? How else can we frame that? Or what stems can we provide to help them think about things in a different way? So I think for us as internal staff in the Office of Innovation and Continuous Improvement, we've just had to kind of recognize what our role is. And I'll say too, and that also requires, when you're thinking about who's doing this work for you, that requires a lot of confidence in staff, the ability to communicate really well, to go in and to work with peers, sometimes, people with higher positions, things like that, to help them be reflective about that work, or their work, I should say. And so just that takes a special skill set. So I would think about that as well. And then also the other key thing that we learned was, we initially had this idea that as we engaged in this work, we could assign work and departments would have time to do that and come back to us. And what we quickly realized was, for the most part, they would prefer to work with us. And they're trying to manage the day-to-day work also. And so that's just something to keep in mind as well. So I hope that answered the question, or at least got us started.
Ms. Ramsey, you had a couple of questions. Do you want to ask the questions that you have?
Yes, I just want to say thank you all. This is awesome. And Dana and your team, I'd love to, if you all could put your contact information, if you'd be willing to do that, I'd love to have a side conversation with you all to learn more about it. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, it sounds like this particular model has lots of structures and processes that are a part of it. I'm wondering, how did you all address, or how are you all thinking about sort of the below the green line things like relationships and agency and empowerment and those kinds of things with the folks who will be delivering on this particular model for service and supports to schools?
That's a good question. So kind of back to where let me flip back to a different slide real quick. There it is. So back to this idea of different types of schools. We've had really robust conversation with department leadership around the notion of the in-district charter school who through their charter already has all of the autonomy. And it's not the department's, the department doesn't have the opportunity then to say what that looks like necessarily. And so for them, it's how do you support the highly autonomous school that already has all that agency within a district or system of schools. So there's that piece. And then there's for schools that aren't in that bucket, so to speak, then it's, so for the schools that are high performing, it introduces the idea of they should be able to earn autonomy or agency in being able to make more decisions at the campus level. But a lot of times that's really hard to let go. And particularly for a department leader, you know, if I have a master's in curriculum instruction, or, you know, if I am an expert in that, it's hard for me sometimes to recognize that a campus leader can be able to make decisions in the same way. And so what we've found over time is, in just working with departments, it's a lot of reiteration of, don't forget, these schools already have that autonomy. So how do you support that? Or what does that service look like for them? And for these schools, remember, some of them will be able to earn autonomy. And for others, then it's, okay, you're the expert, manage foundation. What are the non-negotiables? What is the district going to say that this school needs to do to be able to move to the next level? Just because that's where they are in terms of performance. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Phil, is there another question?
I think that was most of it. Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions that have not yet been answered?
And we do have 10 minutes. So if you guys just want to come off mute and ask, that's totally fine too.
Can I add one thing, Dana?
Yes.
So I think that to your question in part, Mr. Ramsey, I think that, you know, part of San Antonio's thinking here on the theory of action, you asked, you know, how did they get to this balanced place in the first place? I think part of the thought process was that school leaders want autonomy to different degrees and under different circumstances. And part of a good leader retention and attraction strategy is being responsive to that desire for autonomy. Like, that's true. What's also true, and this is related to the commissioner's remarks yesterday, like, what's also true is that a coherent, congruent pedagogical approach with instructional frameworks and aligned curriculum is a big part of how you drive successful outcomes in particular urban school districts. And so the thinking here was like, how can we balance these two things? How can we have a framework that respects and responds to the desire of school leaders to have autonomy, and also holds core what we at SAISD believe needs to be true for all schools in order to drive student outcomes? And so this notion of like the managed foundation and then the processes for differentiating outside of it, like, this was really that effort to find a way to be an employer of choice and a high satisfaction employer, while also holding true to like the most critical elements of school model and pedagogy to drive results.
Thank you, Adam. All right, well, we'll hang out here for a little bit if anybody has additional questions.
I've got a question for you, Dana. I think that it might be worth talking about going, you know, back in time to the original like theory of action development process and coming to MP as the framework. What type of, you know, what was the discussion and engagement? It was actually before my time. I know a lot of it was with the board, the superintendent, and others. Like, what was that discussion? What else did the district consider before landing here?
So I think I would say the conversation originated because we started our work to develop the school performance framework first. And so it was through our engagement around, you know, what makes a quality school, you know, what values are most important to our community, How do we measure that? Even asking questions of teachers and campus leaders about autonomy. And we've had, I think the other thing to note about SCISD that's unique is, and we've had in-district charter schools since 2000. However, we're up to 38 in-district charter schools now out of a system of roughly 90 plus schools within the district. And so given that they service a significantly large part of our community, it also kind of beg the question, how can we best serve them as well as the neighborhood school? How can we ensure that the neighborhood school has additional opportunities for autonomy without having to become an in-district charter? So I think it was definitely related to striking a balance, even in that sense.
That makes sense. Does that answer your question, Mr. Ramsey, about how the district landed here?
I think something might have happened. I see him on there twice. All right, well, I did drop in the chat a link to the document that we have published on our Office of Innovation website under Theory of Action. And right now it's just a PDF, eventually there'll be a website. But right now that PDF includes 2 documents that we created. I could actually share my screen. 2 documents that we created to help us engage departments in the work. And so actually Adam's team helped us with this. And so it basically it provides an overview of Theory of Action, talks about what it is, including those key elements that I mentioned in the presentation. And then it introduces this annual implementation cycle for Theory of Action, where we convene a task force to oversee its implementation, engage stakeholders to identify successes and challenges of the prior year, publish what I mentioned earlier, the Theory of Action guidebook, and then be able to review and refine that plan on an annual basis. The second part gets a little bit deeper into it in terms of providing the background about the Theory of Action and board policy AE local. And then it also is geared towards the department so that they understand what their role is in this. And then that's where that graphic from the presentation came from, is we needed a way to kind of show them what the journey would look like as we worked with them. And then following this is our current version of AE local, which actually was updated Monday night. So we'll have to update this, but it doesn't impact this portion of the policy related to performance management. So that's all there in that link. And then Phil put our contact information in case anybody wants to reach out individually. So Michael, are we good to wrap up and let people kind of transition to their next?
I think so. So if anybody wants to hang back with questions, that's great, but we can go ahead and step out, give everybody a little bit of a break in this Zoom world. Sometimes things feel a little closer together than they used to be. So Dana, thank you so much. Phil, thank you for the work you all are doing in San Antonio, for presenting this morning. So it's much appreciated.
You're very welcome. And it was good to see everybody.